All right, so welcome to lesson 2.2 of this unit. We're going to be talking about APA formatting. So before we talked about performing a literature review, so now we're going to talk about how do you take those references that you used in your literature review, and how do you cite them? How do you put them, format them properly in the text? So that's what we'll be talking about in this lesson. So here are some different citation styles, and you will find there are literally almost hundreds of different preferred citation styles based on the organization. But here are some of the more common organizations and the citation style used. In this course, we'll be following the American Psychological Association style, commonly known as APA. In this lesson, I'll go through some of the overview of citing in the APA format, but also this is a great resource here from Purdue that can give you some further examples of how to cite using APA format. So here are some in-text citations. So when you're in the body of your review of literature, here are some examples of how to properly cite. And the first here is when we're talking about citations for one author. You notice that here you have the year can be inside parentheses when it's part of a sentence. So according to Kirk, in 2020, teaching research methods is one of the most exciting things a professor can do. On the other hand, if it's at the end, teaching research methods is one of the most exciting things a professor can do. So you can see the difference between that. Usually when you say according to, usually you put the author outside of the parentheses. When it's just simply at the end of the sentence, you end up putting both the author and the year in parentheses, followed by the period. When working with two authors, you would indicate using the same format according to Kirk and Smith with the year, and then you can see remainder of the sentence. And finally, here you see at the end, you'd follow with Kirk and Smith at the end. Again, the key with this is when you're doing two authors, that if it's within a sentence and it's outside of the parentheses, use the word and. However, if it's inside the parentheses, use the ampersand. So just keep that in mind as to when you use the word and or the ampersand. Easiest thing to do is remember is if it's inside parentheses, use the ampersand. Outside, use the word and. Now here's when you're looking at using authors, 3 to 5 authors in your citation. And you notice that here you would list the first time, you would list all the authors in that article. However, again, here's an example of using it when it's within a sentence or at the end of the sentence. Notice again the ampersand with it because it's inside the parentheses. However, in subsequent, when you use the article after the first time it's been cited within the text, then you can use the word colleagues if it's or et al. It's best if it's within a sentence to use the word and colleagues. However, if it's within a parentheses, you would want to use et al. So either way, make sure that you identify how to use it. Again, the first time you do it, you end up citing all the authors, and then any subsequent, you can use and colleagues, or you can end up using et al. With it inside the parentheses. So again, all of these are just the author's last name that you would include in this citation. Well, what about 6 or more authors? Well, in this case, you would want to use the word, the first author's last name, followed by and colleagues, if it's within the sentence itself, or if it's at the end of a sentence, it would be Kirk et al., followed by the year. The reason for this is that it would become too cumbersome to wade through all these authors in a research literature review. And so a quarter or more of the literature review would be simply citations. So just keep in mind, if it's 6 or more, then you would use the word and colleagues or et al. Now, what about when doing citations for organizations? Well, again, the first time that you use that organization's name, it needs to be spelled out. In this case, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and then you would put parentheses, CDC. Again, it could be either within the body of the sentence or within the sentence itself, or it could be at the end. But notice if it's in parentheses, you put Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, followed by the brackets here, and then the year. However, any subsequent citations of the same organizations, you would then simply be able to use the abbreviation throughout. So the first time that you use it, it needs to spell out the organization, followed by the abbreviation, and then you can just simply use the abbreviation for the remainder of the document. Now, we're using in-text citations for 2 or more citations from the same statement. We talked about this in previously when you may take 2 or 3 or 4 different references to make a statement. Well, how would you actually reference that? Well, here's an example of a statement followed by not 1 but 2 different references. And the idea is you would again cite the author's last name, and then for the first article, you'd have the semicolon, and here would be the citation for the second article. Now, if you have an article that has the same last name, this is when you would include the individual's initial for their first name. But that's the only time you would include the initial for the first name. Otherwise, you're just using the last name of the authors. Now, there might be situations where you may use the author, the same author that publishes something in the same year, or 2 different publications. In that case, what you would do is you would distinguish the 2 with the letters A and B, and that would indicate to the reader that this is the same author but 2 different citations. In the reference or bibliography, you would not have to use the letters A and B because the titles of the article would distinguish the 2. Now, there are situations where you may want to perform a direct or use a direct quote. Here's an example. If it's less than 40 words, you need to make sure that you cite the author, but then use quotations. So direct quotes, you would use quotations, but also you would want to make sure that you include the page number. Failure to include the page number would be incorrect citation. So again, here's an example when you say according to, and then you would have the author and the year, followed by the quote, and then finishing up with the page number. And here's when you start the sentence with a quotation, and then you would end with the author, year, and the page number. There might be situations where you decide that it's important to use a direct quotation of more than 40 words. Well, in this case, you would not use quotations, but rather you would indent using a hanging indentation throughout for that particular quotation within the text of the body. And then you would follow it with the page number. So again, this is for using quotations of more than 40 words. Now, I need to caution you in terms of using too many direct quotations, whether more or less than 40 words, in a research proposal. It's best if you can limit these quotations, but rather paraphrase text from the sources as a much better approach. So in other words, if you have a direct quote, it's best if you can paraphrase that and then cite it as we talked about it. When paraphrasing another author, your goal is to express the meaning of the author using your own words, and that's a more effective approach. There are times where you may need to use a direct quote, but those are generally rare cases when it might be, let's say, from a research article, the investigator was having a direct emphasis or point to make about limitations in the literature, or to potentially another article that they were citing or making an argument for or against. But other than that, usually it's best if you summarize or paraphrase the meaning of a particular part of a article and then cite it as we talked about it. Otherwise, if you have a article that has um, direct quotes after direct quotes after direct quotes, it becomes very redundant, and it becomes essentially those individuals writing your article without receiving credit. So it's important that you limit the direct quotes to just those very rare cases. Otherwise, paraphrasing is the more appropriate way to go about in your citations. So here's an example of a reference page in APA style, and you'll notice again they're going to be alphabetized by the by the letter of the last name. In cases where there is no direct author, such as a government report, then there would be no author, but that would end up start with wherever the statistics came from. But you can see you have the complete, or you have a half-inch indentation on the second and third and subsequent lines. You notice that you have the author's last name, you have the date, followed by the title of the article. Here is the manuscript in italicized, and then this is going to be the volume, and then the page numbers that should be included. So keep this in mind as some examples regarding the citation of in your reference page. Oh, one final thing is this DOI. It's not required in APA format. So if you don't have that, no need to worry. And then again, just to reiterate, just to clear, this is going to be the volume, and this would be the issue, and this would be the page number. Just wanted to be clear on that. And here are some common mistakes that you'd want to avoid when doing your reference page. For example, trying to pass off someone else's writing as your own without providing a proper citation for the source. That could be plagiarism. It's copying text from a source without using the proper quotation format, even if you provide a citation for the source. Citing a source for something you wrote in your paper that was completely fabricated. This is more difficult to identify, but it's something that should not be done. In numbers 1 and 2, I'll be using plagiarism software to identify if plagiarism has happened, so it's important for you to use proper citations. Using too many direct quotes to fill space in your paper. That's an indication of someone who is not putting forth the effort to use their own original style, their own original work, and that should be avoided. Also, including citations that are not in your reference list and vice versa. So make sure that if you use it in the text, make sure it's in the reference page and vice versa. If you're going to put it in the reference page, it only should be there in the reference page if it's somewhere in the text. So it's going to be important that you verify that when you write your proposal. Now, it's important that you follow these or avoid these mistakes in making sure that there is no plagiarism. If there is plagiarism in your assignment, you would receive an F on your assignment and subsequently an F for the class. And we don't want that to happen. So make sure that you review these ways to use APA formatting properly and to avoid these mistakes. And again, at this point, this concludes the lesson for 2.2. Make sure you review both lessons in this Unit 2 before taking the quiz.